Hey guys, John here from Bring the SEO. In this short presentation, I'm going to share with you 10 reasons why proposals are a waste of time. Now again, this is a conversation that upsets quite a few SEO consultants, but it's one that I strongly believe in simply because I haven't done a proposal in more than 10 years and I simply flat out refuse to do them. I won't do proposals anymore. And a lot of people find that rather confusing. But I'm going to share with you 10 reasons why I no longer do proposals and why I believe they're an absolute waste of time. Then, of course, I'm going to share with you a much better way. So let's look at a typical scenario. You spend time with a prospect, asking questions and gathering information about their business, their goals, and their objectives. They give you the full run through, telling you everything you need to know, and then they say, "That sounds great. Can you send us a proposal?" So you agree to doing the proposal. You say, yes, we'll do the proposal. And you go about requesting access to the website. And then, of course, you get bogged down in analyzing technical SEO, such as on-page, off-page, links. You might look at some of their competitors. You do a little bit of keyword research and essentially assess overall site performance. And this whole process might take you half a day, or sometimes even longer. Putting a detailed proposal together, being sure to make it look all fancy and professional. Then, of course, you save it as a PDF, you proof it, you save it as a PDF, and then you send it off via email. So what often happens next? 1, they ghost you. This is probably worst case scenario. The prospect doesn't respond at all. They stop responding to all calls, emails, and text messages. And I say this is worst case scenario because you don't even get any feedback. Not getting any feedback is probably worse than getting bad or negative feedback because it leaves you hanging. You'll be in a position of thinking, was it the price? Did they not receive the proposal? It can leave you in a state of limbo, and that is probably worst. That's probably worst out of any situation. The problem, of course, is that you've just wasted all that time for absolutely nothing. 2, they say no. The client receives your proposal and they say thanks but no thanks, complaining about price or something else. The problem here, of course, is again, you just wasted all of that time for absolutely nothing. 3, they forward your proposal to someone else. I've had this happen, and I've certainly received a lot of proposals from other agencies, and it's really not an ideal situation. So in other words, the prospect takes the recommendations and strategies you've outlined in your proposal, and they send it off to another agency. The problem with that, of course, is that you've just showed someone else, possibly a competitor, what to do. And when that happens, that can sometimes end in them offering to do it at a much cheaper rate. 4, they flick straight through to the price. And this happens essentially when you're sending a PDF proposal. They open it up in their email, they open up the attachment, and they flick straight through to the price. In other words, the prospect receives a proposal and goes straight to the price, skipping over everything you've outlined. The problem with this, of course, is that you've missed any opportunity to demonstrate value, and instead it's become a race to the bottom based upon nothing but price. 5, they were never really serious to begin with. I've dealt with prospects like this, and it can be a real pain in the ass when you spend all of this time investing only to find out that they're kind of just shopping around. This is where the prospect gets the proposal and mucks you around, saying they'll get back to you, but they eventually just drift off. The problem with this is that you realize over time that the prospect was never really serious and the whole thing has just been a waste of time. 6, they complain about the price. The prospect complains about the price, asking why it's so expensive and that several other agencies they've spoken with can do it cheaper. I'm sure we've all experienced that. I know I certainly have. The problem with this is that you realize you're dealing with someone who has absolutely no budget. 7, they never read the damn thing. This is even more frustrating than ever. The prospect keeps telling you they'll look at it soon and get back to you, but they never do. The problem with this is that you waste even more time going back and forth, following up with the lead. 8, you're just like everyone else. The prospect has spoken with a dozen other SEO agencies and your proposal is shoved in their inbox amongst everyone else's. And this is fairly typical, especially when they're in that phase of shopping around and trying to find the right agency to work with. The problem with this, of course, is that you're viewed as just another agency. You're not special, and essentially anyone can do the job. 9, the prospect doesn't understand it. And this, of course, is where the prospect doesn't understand half of what you've included in your proposal, especially if you filled it with a lot of technical jargon. And this leads to confusion and never-ending back and forth questions. The problem, of course, is that you're now in a position of having to try and explain everything during never-ending meetings, calls, and emails. And that's where you can find yourself going around and around and around in circles, and it's incredibly frustrating. 10, inability to overcome objections. And this is certainly true when you're sending a PDF proposal as an email attachment. The prospect looks over the proposal and doesn't agree with many of the recommendations you've made, and as a result says no. The problem with this, of course, is that you potentially lose a prospect simply because you weren't able to explain the recommended strategies. So the overall outcome of all of this is essentially, it could be wrapped up in the following few points. You end up wasting an enormous amount of time. Your close rates suck. You end up making rash decisions, dropping the price or increasing deliverables and service offerings. This is where you can panic and say, okay, they're saying no, or they're not getting back to me because maybe my price is too high. I'm going to drop my price, or maybe I need to add more stuff to make my offer more attractive. It's not a good place to be. And lastly, of course, with all of these problems combined, you end up feeling disappointed and burnt out. So what can we do to solve these problems and improve our close rates? We can start hosting presentations. In other words, stop sending traditional PDF proposals and instead start hosting presentations. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to stand up in front of 80 people in an auditorium and, point at a board with a laser pointer and do a TED talk. That's not what it means at all. Although you could certainly do that. But what I'm getting at is hosting presentations via way of video conferencing calls. And this is essentially what I do. Putting together a PowerPoint presentation or a slide deck and presenting your pitch via a video call. Now, the benefits of doing presentations are numerous. Firstly, you give everything, but they get nothing. Unlike sending a PDF proposal, where they're actually receiving something that they can print out or perhaps forward on to someone else, you're giving them everything in the way of the video presentation or live presentation rather. You're explaining and going through absolutely everything, outlining absolutely everything. They can see exactly what they're getting, the inclusions, exclusions. You're being completely transparent and giving everything, but they actually don't receive anything. And that's ideal because you don't want them forwarding this information over to someone else. Secondly, you can go through the prospect. You can go through everything with the prospect and clearly explain it in a way that they understand. And this is incredibly important, especially for business owners. And let's face it, most of them don't have technical SEO knowledge. If they did, they wouldn't be hiring us. But being able to break things down in a way in which clients can understand, especially when you can break it down into layman's terms and explain what you're doing, how it will be done, and perhaps even why you're doing certain things, that can be tremendously beneficial, and it can give the client a better sense of confidence and trust. And that, of course, can help you close more deals. Next point is you can set expectations, which prevents miscommunication. This is a big one. And this is where you need to understand that when you're pitching, it's not just about sales. It's about a whole bunch of other things. It's about demonstrating expertise, building trust, setting expectations, covering inclusions and exclusions and recommendations and timeframes and all of those things. But setting expectations, certainly at the beginning, is incredibly important because if you don't, that leads to problems afterwards in terms of and this is where you find yourself working with a client that's being demanding or rude, or they're emailing and calling you every day simply because you haven't set, and they're doing so simply because you haven't set expectations. So you need to clarify expectations, and you can do that within a live presentation. Next, you can cover inclusions and exclusions, which prevents ad hoc, out-of-scope requests. And this is essentially, I don't know about you guys, but for me, certainly you pick up an SEO client and you begin the campaign, and then suddenly you become tech support. Obviously, you don't want that. So you need to go through your inclusions, what they're actually getting, and the exclusion, what's out of scope. We don't do tech support. We don't do training. We don't do email support. We don't do, we're not here to do graphic design and all of these other things. That's incredibly important. And of course, you can cover all of that in your presentation. Next, you can address any potential obstacles and objections. This is a big one. Unlike when you're sending a PDF proposal, as I said, as an email attachment, when you're hosting a presentation, you can stop occasionally and ask, do you have any questions? Are there any concerns? You can essentially address all of those concerns, objections, and any potential obstacles that come up during the call. And you can put those things to bed so that by the end of the presentation, the only question they have is, brilliant, how do we get started? And that's essentially what you want. Next, you're establishing a relationship because you're actually interacting with the client. When you're sending over just an attachment, a PDF proposal, you're not doing any of that. You're just the same as everyone else, and there's no human interaction there whatsoever. By doing the presentation, you're on camera, you can walk them through it, you can have some small talk, you can build a rapport. Again, it's all about getting to that point of know, like, and trust. Next point, you can demonstrate expertise, which helps build confidence and trust. And that revisits my previous point. Of course, when you've got confidence and trust, you're more likely to close more deals. And of course, lastly, you stand out, unlike everyone else who sent the prospect a PDF proposal. If you are in a position where you're competing with, let's say, 10 other agencies and 9 of them, or all of them have sent PDF proposals, and you do a presentation, you're going to get the job every single time. And this is the main benefit of doing presentations as opposed to sending proposals. You increase your close rates. And doing presentations is the most powerful way of closing more leads and securing higher paying clients. I know this is true because when I shifted from doing proposals and experiencing all of those problems that I've just outlined and started doing presentations, everything changed. I closed almost 100%. My close rates were like 95%. Now, just before we continue, I want to say there's a big but here. There's but it's a big one, right? You must pre-qualify the lead before you prepare the presentation. And this is where you give a brief summary of your policies, procedures, the way in which you work, whether or not you use lock-in contracts, all of those things. But most importantly of all, you need to mention your rates. You've got to cover your rates, because if you don't, you then put yourself in a position where you could experience some of those problems that we've already covered, right? So you've got to get your rates out there and say, hey, we charge $3,500 a month during the pre-qualification call before you start putting the presentation together. Because if you don't, you're at risk of wasting an enormous amount of time, like I said. So to summarize, presentations can help you triple your close rates because you stand out. They can prevent problems ahead of campaign commencement. They can make you look far more professional and organized, and they can allow you to address concerns and objections immediately. And most importantly of all, and this is why I no longer do proposals, they can increase your earning potential significantly. Hey, if you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to learn more, head over to bringtheseo.com. We provide business development training for SEO consultants wanting to improve their processes, increase profits, and scale to $100,000 a month or more without all the stress and overwhelm.